In this lecture, we are going to be starting our last module of the semester where we're looking at environment. And what we're going to be looking at environment today is through site-specific art. Now, site-specific art is art that is conceived and created in relation to the particular conditions of a specific site and only to those conditions. And so what we're going to examine here, right, we're going to examine artwork that in some way is related or linked to the site it is at. Now, think back from our walking tour on campus, whether you got to go on the tour, if you had to listen to it remotely, and we saw some works of art that were site-specific. Some examples, think of Effervescence or Symphony of Notes that was on the School of Music. That work is literally on the building to help denote it as the School of Music. Now, we could move that sculpture and put it somewhere else, and we would still have a work of art, but it wouldn't be quite as site-specific. Again, it was intentionally designed and created to be on that spot. Next, think of over by the business school. We have two there. We have Skydance, which was the memorial to the gentleman who passed away who had worked in the School of Business. And then even Big Red, the large red abstract sculpture. Again, it was intentionally placed by the School of Business because it's supposed to represent the ideas of the business world, that you have to be constantly changing, innovative, and see something new. Continuing on, Freedom Park. Freedom Park's very interesting. Remember, Freedom Park, when it was constructed as a counter memorial, and it was a counter memorial or a counter monument to the Confederate monument. So that one was very site-specific. But what's interesting now, the Confederate monument has been removed. So that almost changes a little bit of the site specificity of Freedom Park. That while Freedom Park's message is still there, the meaning has slightly changed because remember when it was first constructed, it was this counter memorial. It was there to challenge the claims of the Confederate monument, which is no longer there. Continuing on, other works, The Balance of Dreams and Plans. This one was at the Kent School of Social Work. This was intentionally placed there, again, to remind those who were studying to become social workers to keep in balance, right, their clients' dreams and also their plans. And that to do this, you had to be a successful social worker. Other examples, Integrity and Red I-beams over by the Speed School, and then Rust Belt Baroque number 4, which this again became a memorial. The sculpture was created by the former head of the sculpture department or the sculpture program, and it became a type of memorial after he passed away. So all of these works of art, again, while we could move them and put them in other places, it would in a way change their meaning because they are intended for the specific site they were at. And then we did have one example on the tour of a work that would make sense in a different site. And remember, this was Truth and Justice. Truth and Justice was kind of tucked away in front of Mitzi. And this was the one that it's intended to remind those in the law field to balance truth and justice. And we had the conversation that it seems that would make more sense if it was actually located in front of the law school. All right, moving on. Other examples of site-specific art. This is called Cloud Gate. It's often referred to as the Bean. The artist hates that it's referred to as the Bean. But this was created by Anish Kapoor in 2004. It is made of stainless steel, and it is in Millennium Park in Chicago. And the work weighs over 100 tons. And so when Kapoor created this work, he had very intentional design. In fact, he says, "What I wanted to do in Millennium Park is make something that would engage the Chicago skyline so that one will see the clouds kind of floating in with those very tall buildings reflected in the work. And then, since it is in the form of a gate, the participant, the viewer, will be able to enter into this very deep chamber that does, in a way, something to one's reflection as the exterior of the piece is doing to the reflection of the city around. And so for this, right, he very intentionally and very specifically designed it to reflect the city skyline. And then you walked through, I don't know if you can see kind of the front right, you can see where the visitors are supposed to walk through this gate. And so part of my question with this is, would it change if we moved the cloud gate to a different location? What if we moved it to something like New York City or even downtown Louisville, where we still have a skyline represented within the work? I think we can make an argument that in that case, it would still be effective and still have the desire the artist wanted. But what happens if we move it to something like an empty field? That, I think, would definitely change the meaning and the message of the work because, again, it was specifically designed to reflect the skyline. Another example of site-specific art, this we're looking at, it's classified as what's called earthworks, and these are large outdoor environments, and these large outdoor environments are made in and of the land itself. Now, these we could definitely argue that they're site-specific because usually they are designed and created for a specific site, but they are also literally made of the site. And we see that in what I have here. This is Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty, and it's located in the Great Salt Lake in Salt Lake City, Utah. It was originally constructed 1969 to 1970. It is made up of black rock, salt crystals, earth, and red water. It's 3 feet 6 inches by 15 feet by 1,500 feet. And you can literally go out and walk on this. And so what's interesting with this, right, it's literally part of the site. And also with these earthworks, right, this work will eventually weather and decay away. And you can see in the image that I have on the bottom right, here you can see it's almost completely submerged, and there are times of year when this work is completely underwater. And so think of the water and then wind and other erosion factors. Eventually this work will kind of dissolve back into the earth itself. All right, next, this is in relation to an article I had you read. In the article that you have, there are actually 2 different video clips. I do want you to watch the first one, and I actually have the link here for you also. And what the one is that you get an introduction to Richard Serra. They do talk about Tilted Arc, but then you also get to hear Serra himself talk, and he's very impassioned, strongly believes in his art and the message of it. So what we're going to look at here, this is the controversy over Tilted Arc. And Tilted Arc was created by Richard Serra. Richard Serra is an artist. He usually works with these very, very large scale metal sculptures. And a lot of the times he's trying to make you more aware of the space you are in. For example, there's ones that as you're walking through them, they kind of get smaller and more narrow. And it makes you aware of that space. Imagine as if you were, walking down a hallway. Most of the time we don't think about it. But if you were walking down a hallway and it started getting smaller and smaller, you become more aware of the space that you're occupying and how you are using it. And that's a common theme in his works. Well, what happened with Tilted Arc? Tilted Arc was commissioned in 1979 by the United States federal government as part of a program sponsoring public art and wanting to put more works of public art into more spaces and to support the artworks. And so what happens is he's commissioned, it was installed in 1981, and then it was actually removed in 1989. Tilted Arc was made of weatherproof steel, and it was 12 feet by 120 feet by 2.5 feet thick. And so here you can see in this image, it's a little bit closer, and you can see how massive this work was. And so then it was placed in Federal Plaza in Washington, D.C. And so where we're standing from the vantage point of this photograph, we would be literally standing in the federal building, looking at a window, looking down onto Tilted Arc. So what happens is that the work, as you can see, it bisected the plaza, and it was blocking the views and paths to those who frequented the plaza. And this was part of Serra's design. In fact, he says, the viewer becomes aware of himself and his movement through the plaza. As he moves, the sculpture changes. Contraction and expansion of the sculpture result from the viewer's movement. Step by step, the perception not only of the sculpture but of the entire environment change. And now also the sculpture, for many of his works, he says they're not completed once they are installed because this is made out of self-oxidizing steel. So what it means is over time, naturally it's going to rust and the appearance will change. Well, what's interesting is almost as soon as this work was put up, there was immediate backlash from those who worked in the area, especially from Chief Judge Edward D. Ray. And basically, those who worked in it hated it because they had to walk around it and bisected the plaza. For Serra, though, he's like, that's exactly the point. And so within a few months of the work being installed, there was a petition with over 1,300 government employees that had signed asking for the removal of Tilted Arc. Serra, however, said it is a site-specific work, meaning he created and designed it for that specific site. And if you were to relocate it or to remove it, that would actually destroy the work. It would be, if you put it in a new location, he says it would destroy it because that's not ever how it was intended to be used. It was intended and it was created for this specific site. So what happens is this starts a bunch of political debate. They had a public hearing on the topic of whether to remove it or not. This was in March of 1985. 122 people testified in favor of keeping it and 58 in favor of removing it. Notable speakers who were in favor of keeping it were artists such as Philip Glass, Keith Haring, and Claus Oldenburg. The local workers wanted it removed. Here's a couple quotes from them. One person said that it was holding the site hostage. The New Yorker magazine was quoted saying, quote, I think it is perfectly legitimate to question whether public spaces and public funds are the right context for work that appeals to so few people, no matter how far it advances the concept of sculpture. And then another local worker said, every time I pass this so-called sculpture, I just can't believe it. The General Services Administration, or whoever approved this goes beyond the realm of stupidity. This goes into even worse than insanity. I think an insane person would say, how crazy can you be to pay $175,000 for that rusted metal wall? You would have to be insane, more than insane. And so what happens is you have this continued debate over moving the sculpture. Well, eventually, a jury of 5 individuals voted 4-1 to have it removed. And so what happened in 1986 is Serra then sued the United States General Service Administration to stop the removal of Tilted Arc. And this launched a lawsuit that was considered one of the most notorious public sculptures controversy in the history of art law. And that's what that second video in the article is about. It's about the court case over Tilted Arc. And so again with this, it's asking, who has the right to decide what is done with the work of art? Because Serra says he does. Why? He is the one who created it and built it, and he says part of its design is it was built for that specific spot. And again, he said to remove it is to destroy the work. Then we have the government who's like, well, we commissioned it, we paid for it, so we own it. We should get to decide what to do with it. And so what eventually happened is it was removed and then it was destroyed because Serra's claim that it would destroy the art and that you couldn't just reinstall it somewhere else. He was successful in that, but he was not successful in keeping it in the area. And so, this I think brings up some interesting questions. Who has the right to say what it is, whether it can be there or not? And also I want you to think about, was this work site specific? The artist claims it was, but the government who owned it said, no, we think we could move it somewhere else and it would still have the message. So those are things I want you to think about in relation to Tilted Arc. Okay, Next, we are going to move on to site-specific monuments and memorials. Now, what makes these so specific is that we are going to look at the New York City 9/11 Memorial and at the Flight 93 Memorial. And these two memorials are located at the site where the event that's being memorialized occurred. So first we'll start with the New York City 9/11, which you can see here. You can see one of the pools of reflecting absence in the front. The building in the middle, underneath that is where the Memorial Museum is. And then the building you see on the left, that is part of Freedom Tower. And so, at its core, the 9/11 Memorial's purpose is to honor the people who are no longer with us because a group of Islamist terrorists took them from us far too soon. The memorial also offers a tremendous opportunity to bring people together in much the same way that we saw the world come together immediately following the attacks. The act of remembering is a measure of tribute in and of itself. These words are from the official guidebook published for the 9/11 Memorial in New York City. The creation of this memorial has been unlike any other in history. While many monuments and memorials in the present day are open to interaction with the public, no other work has so directly involved the public in its conception. Sorry, my dog is whining. So what happens in the development of the 9/11 New York Memorial is we have the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, which is the LMDC, was created to oversee the project that attempted to decide what should be done with the 16 acres that comprise Ground Zero. The mission statement of the LMDC states, quote, "We come here to remember those who were killed, those who survived, and those who were changed forever. May all who leave here know the impact of violence. May this memorial offer comfort, strength, peace, hope, and serenity." And so what happens with this, right, this was very interesting, how they put the public into this memorial planning. In fact, the LMDC held over 200 town hall meetings to listen and learn to what the community wanted in the memorial. There were many different and often conflicting ideas. Some wanted the entire 16 acres to become a memorial. Others wanted the area to be redeveloped into office buildings again, and others wanted a combination of these. Because you have to remember, right, this is 16 acres in the middle of Manhattan, right? This is a very expensive property. So they also held what's called a Listening to the City Forum, and this was where residents and business owners of New York City were directly asked what they would like to see done with the land. Over 5,000 people participated in this forum. The designs continued to shrink until the main desire began to preserve the footprints of the Twin Towers. Ironically enough, though, the footprints had already been cleared away. Ground Zero was basically an empty site at this point. As noted in August 2002, almost all plans for the entire site to be a memorial were gone, and the footprints of the towers began to serve as a representation of the larger space of the tragic event. Eventually, the LMDC decided to hold a competition for the design of the space, and there were over 5,000 entries. And from this, Daniel Leapskid's Memories Foundation was chosen as the winner. This design both preserved part of the site for the memorial and reconstructed the skyline with the 1,776-foot tall Freedom Tower. And again, that number is important, right? 1776, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Leapskid's design purposely left the footprints of the two towers undesigned for a future memorial. So again, a second competition was held in 2003 to decide the design of the memorial. The design competition was open to the entire world. Anybody could enter it, and it became the largest design competition in history. And what would happen is there would be a jury, and they would decide the winners. The jury included famous architects such as Maya Lin, the architect of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and Jan Scruggs. He was the founder of the Vietnam's Veteran Memorial Commission. Politicians, Lower Manhattan residents and business owners, and representatives from the victim's family adversary council. And so what the idea was this group reflected the public the memorial wished to engage. All in all, there were 5,201 entries, and each of these was sent on 30 by 40-inch presentation boards. And what happened is the jurors each viewed these individually in a secret location. Basically, they were in a warehouse in New Jersey. And they would tag the ones they liked. And this took over 6 months. Any entries without tags were eliminated, and then the jury met to discuss the remaining entries, and the 13 jurors limited down to 9 finalists. Only at this point did the jurors learn the identity of the designers, and they had the opportunity to meet with the finalists. Each designer was then given $130,000 to create models of their design, and they were also offered advice from the jurors. So, for example, Michael Rod, his design, he was told he needed more green space. And because of this, he engaged the help of landscape architect Peter Walker. In November 2003, the jury viewed the models and narrowed the projects from 9 to 3. These designs were also shown to the victim's family and were published to the world for comments and reactions. In 2004, Michael Rod and Peter Walker's Reflecting Absence won because the jurors agreed the design spoke to the site more directly than the others, and they felt it could hold its own in its setting at the base of Freedom Tower. And this is interesting. This is what Rod said about his design. He said, "I have a sense of hope looking forward that this memorial will be successful in creating this quiet, reverent place of contemplation that allows people to gather and find communication with each other. The site is so powerful that we need to do very little. It would be very easy to bring something to this design that would completely upset the balance of this place and focus attention on whatever we think right now is the most important thing. For me, the goal in the design has always been to remove all the excess, to remove all of the distracting details, and really bring the site in its essence to its core." And so that's what you see with Reflecting Absence, right? He's talking about how the site itself, that these events occurred here, makes it so powerful that not a lot more needs to be done. So Reflecting Absence consists of 2 large waterfalls that stand where the original footprints of the Twin Towers once were. Again, these are not the original footprints that were left from the towers. Those had been removed, but they are constructed where those had stood. The waterfalls are the 2 largest man-made waterfalls in North America, and they drain into a central void that seems bottomless. This is intended to represent the continuing absence of those who perished. The pools are surrounded by a metal frame that contains the names of all of those who perished in the events of 9/11, not just those who died in New York City, and it also has the name of the 6 individuals who were killed in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. So what happens when the visitor walks up, right? There's this open green space where the visitor can sit on these benches. You see them over on the left and talk about it. And then once you're up close, remember, you're in downtown Manhattan. It's very, very loud. But once you're standing in front of the waterfalls, that's really all you hear, right? And so those sounds, the distracting noises all go away, and the viewer can just contemplate and reflect on what happened at that location. Now, what's interesting is Arad claims the most trying part of the design was how to display the names of the victims. He did not just want to list them alphabetically. He couldn't list them chronologically because remember, most people who perished in 9/11 perished when the towers collapsed. And eventually he decided on what was called meaningful adjacencies, meaning people who listed, the people would be listed with those they were associated with in their lives. For example, firemen were listed with those they had served with. Co-workers were listed together. Those who were traveling together, and even those who died together. And Arad's struggle reflects the cultural change from just wanting to list names and he wanted this arrangement to have a deeper meaning. So some examples of these meaningful adjacencies. If you look at the Pentagon Memorial, they were listed, the victims were listed from youngest to oldest. Well, part of the problem with that was there was a family of 4 who was on the plane when it crashed, and that family's completely separated because they were all different ages. Alphabetically, again, you would be missing these connections. It would just be in alphabetical order. People who knew each other or even related to each other would not be together. And so what he did with these meaningful adjacencies, They grouped people according to things they knew, right? What ladder or fire company you were in, who the employer was, if you were traveling on the plane, if you were traveling with specific people, all of those would be in some way grouped together. And then they also opened it up. They opened it up to anybody else to tell them these meaningful adjacencies. And so some of the stories, there was a woman whose father was in one of the Twin Towers and her best friend was on one of the planes. And so their names are linked. There are stories of different firefighters who were father-son. They worked in different fire and different ladder companies. They both perished. Their names are linked. On one of the planes, there was a group of school children who were traveling with their teachers for a National Geographic convention. Their names are all linked together. And so for this, right, for Rod, this was also very, very important, that he didn't want just a rote listing of names, but that he wanted to celebrate how these individuals were also related in life. Now, what's also interesting on the 9/11 site is that we have what's almost called a spontaneous memorial. This, again, is very site-specific, and this is what's now known as the survivor tree. So the survivor tree is a callelary pear tree that was part of the landscape of the original World Trade Center. It stood on the east side of the site between World Trade Center 4 and Building 5. After 9/11, the tree was discovered during the cleanup process. It was badly damaged, you can see it here on the left, but it was still alive. And Rebecca Claus started a campaign to save the tree after seeing how it bolstered the spirits of her fellow recovery workers. Eventually, the tree was transported to the Arthur Ross Nursery in the Bronx, and here the New York City Department of Parks and Rec worked to keep the tree alive, and eventually they nursed it back to health. Now, this tree was not intended by Rod or Walker to become part of the memorial, but there became another campaign as the lore of the tree became well known. There was another campaign to return it to the World Trade Center complex. Eventually, what happened in December 2010 with a public ceremony where New York City Mayor Michael R. Bloomberg commented on the tree's survival and how its story inspired so many people, the tree returned to the site. You can see that in the image on the right. By 2015, the legend of the tree had grown to the point where it's now displayed prominently on magnets, greeting cards, t-shirts, and there's even a book that can be purchased at the museum gift shop titled The Survivor Tree, A Story of Hope and Healing. And so what happens with this tree, right, why this wasn't part of the planned memorial, it offers another narrative. It became its own story and its own memorial. When I first visited the site, you just saw here, there's this little kind of fence put up around it. When people realize what the tree was, they leave little gifts, tie ribbons on it, and it became its own memorial, right? That it was on the original site, and even though it was damaged, it was nursed back to health, and it survived, and it's thriving. And so the survivor tree almost became this symbol for the United States, that after the 9/11 attacks, that yes, we were damaged, but, we survived, and we continue on. Now, another site-specific memorial. This is the Flight 93 Memorial out in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And again, the goal of this memorial is they wanted to create a place of quiet reflection for the events that happened on this site. The memorial is dedicated to the 40 people who perished on United Airlines Flight 93 when it crashed in the field outside Shanksville, Pennsylvania. It was mainly paid for by private donations and the Flight 93 National Memorial Act, which also made it part of the National Park System. However, it is very clear once you enter into it, it is not a park like any other. And in fact, once you're in the parking lot, so the sign on the top left is what you see outside on the road, and then you turn in, and you travel 3 miles through this winding, twisting road. And it's almost this transitional space, so you're going somewhere else. Once you are in the parking lot, there are signs that say basically like, this is not a park. This is not your regular park. There's no trash cans. Leave your trash cans in the car. There's no restrooms or anything. Eventually, they have now built a visitor center, but that's removed further away from the site. The mission statement of the Flight 93 Memorial is a common field one day, a field of honor forever. May all who visit this place remember the collective acts of courage and sacrifice of the passengers and crew, revere this hollow ground as a final resting place of those heroes, and reflect on the power of individuals who choose to make a difference. And so what happens is as you're walking, you leave the parking lot, you walk, and there's this long black pathway. And you can see that in the two images on the right and the bottom. And as you're walking along this black pathway, there's an open field to your left. And the pathway kind of goes around this field and then to the white wall. And this is what's called the Wall of Names. This consists of 40 marble panels, one for each crew member and passenger who died in the flight, and their names are listed. These names are listed in alphabetical order. And this wall, it's in this accordion-like pattern. You can see this on the top right. And this is supposed to symbolize when the plane came crashing in, it was waving, kind of going back and forth. And it was also upside down. And so this is supposed to reflect, the Wall of Names is supposed to reflect the movement of the plane as it came in. And then from that, you look over to this field. And this was the actual crash site. And you can look, you probably need to zoom in, but in the back there's a large boulder. That boulder had been in the field, and that was the final resting place of the plane. When it crashed, it obviously dug a large trench into the earth. They decided to fill that in, but they left everything else the same. And you can see, again, zoom in, but you can look and see, you can see where the vegetation was burnt away, that the trees are younger and smaller, but they are letting those naturally grow in. Now, again, with both of these memorials, right, they are very site-specific. There are other 9/11 memorials around, the United States and in the world, but these, because they literally are on the spot where the event occurred, seem to have almost an additional level of meaning to them. All right, and then the last thing we're going to look at in this is I have a clip for you up. I want you to watch. This is Abigail DeVille's Harlem Stories. And Abigail DeVille is an artist who creates large sculptures and installations, often incorporating found materials from the neighborhoods around the venues. Often she touches on focuses on themes of lost history, history of racist violence, gentrification, and lost regional history. And so what you're going to watch here, so the artwork is both her going out. It's a type of performance art. It's literally her walking around Harlem with her cart. And pay particular attention of where she's at, why she's in Harlem, and why she's placing these objects where she does. And then the second half of this is we are going to see she does choose a second very specific location. And what she's dealing with in these Harlem stories is she's dealing with this lost history, right? Harlem in New York City was traditionally known as an area, it was very run down, very low socioeconomic classes. This is where you had the projects. Basically, you didn't want to go to Harlem. It was high crime. And what's happened is that Harlem has now been regentrified, that people are coming in and fixing it up. Well, often when things like that happen, you fix places up and then you sell them for higher prices. Well, the people who originally lived there can't afford to live there anymore, so they get pushed out. And that's part of what she's exploring in this. So again, pay attention to what stories she's trying to tell, where she's trying to tell them, and why she's trying to tell them. So I want you to think about, right, we've seen throughout this different ways that site-specific art can be created and the message and the meaning that it has.